conversation. So I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourselves in just a moment. I'm going to introduce myself first, and then we're just going to talk a little bit about our program here with Joan of Arc, who's joining us today, our Master of Arts in Catholic Women and Gender Studies. So I am Leah Jacobson. I'm the program manager here at the Nesti Center for Faith and Culture at the University of St. Thomas. And I'm thrilled to have two of our fellows, our esteemed fellows here at the center with us today, who are also professors in the program. So who wants to go first? I'll let you introduce yourselves.
Sure, I'll go first.
Let's let you go first, Erika.
So I'm Erika Bachiochi. I am a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. I'm a legal scholar. I specialize in kind of the intersection of political and legal theory, constitutional law, women's history, and Catholic social teaching. I'm also the happily married mom of many children who I sometimes bring up in class. And that's it.
Wonderful. All right. And which class are you teaching for us?
And I teach the history of sex and gender.
Yes, you do. It's wonderful. It's been an exciting class for me to get to sit on and listen in on. It's been fabulous content. And Dr. Reuter?
I'm Eileen Reuter, and my area is philosophy and education. And I focus on the intersection between education for girls and Christian anthropology. So I'm teaching the course in the human person here. And I'm also happily married and about to have my fifth child.
Yes, you are. I'm so grateful that you're here. This evening, we're going to be doing a wonderful talk here on campus about education for young women and moral formation. So maybe we actually want to start with a little bit about what we're talking about tonight in your backgrounds in education. I mean, you just shared that you have an education background, but you also are involved with some Catholic girls' education. Mm-hmm. And maybe just share the importance of, studying things like what we're talking about in this program, Catholic Women and Gender Studies, and how that affects maybe formation of girls. Like, is there a connection?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I would say is that I'm a mother of 3 adult daughters, and I also have a bunch of boys and then a little girl. And I sit on the board of a girls' school outside of Boston called Montrose. I also helped to found a classical school, a pre-K to 8 classical school called St. Benedict Classical Academy. And so have been involved in kind of the liberal arts in terms of as board member for quite a while now. And then my background is also, because I studied kind of political theory, my background is kind of in the Western tradition, and my intellectual work is on the history of ideas. So my recent book, The Rights of Women, is an intellectual history of the cause of women's rights. So I think the education of women, I think, is particularly interesting. And one of the arguments I'll make tonight is that just as women were beginning to acquire the civil and political rights that the American founders had denied them, progressive education was kind of coming on strong. So those women, those early women's rights advocates in our country, were eager to have the kind of liberal education that their male peers had, that they were lacking, studying Latin and Greek and these sorts of things, and kind of having a rigorous education in order to kind of order the mind and order the soul. And right around the time they entered into having this kind of education, progressive education theories came about. And so we haven't actually ever seen, I think, except for in sort of small enclaves of, say, Catholic liberal arts colleges and that kind of thing that really educate women quite well. We haven't seen kind of a really vigorously educated woman with who has, all this sort of intellectual moral virtues, who also kind of is carrying out her duties with, her civil and political rights. So I think it's exciting to be sort of on the cusp of this, where we can start to put forth a vision of holding those things all together.
I love that so much, because what you're highlighting that, of course there are outliers. There's women of great virtue that are outliers that, in spite of the education system, in spite of what was afforded to them, that they became women of great virtue. We've got Joan of Arc here. We were talking earlier about Hildegard of Bingen, and we've got Edith Stein, and all these sort of women that, despite all of their challenges and despite the lack of support maybe for them, because they were women, that we can have this type of education. I think, I know you're talking about this more tonight, with what practically is happening right now to help make it so it's not so unique. But I think what we're talking about is really unique right now in the landscape, especially higher education, what we're doing here. Would you agree in general, with what Erika was saying? I'm sure.
Yeah, one thing I was just thinking of too, when you're talking about this being the cusp of we have a new era here. I always like to think that because of the feminist movement, it's actually made us think even more seriously about these issues. So while part of what we're doing in this program is pointing out issues with the feminist movement and reasons that, maybe there's problematic philosophical foundations to pieces of it, but I also think that the very fact of the feminist movement is what has given us this chance to rethink these things and come up with new ways to think about it in education as well.
And I would just, I would just add that, the Catholic Church, because of the education of nuns very, very early on, one of the things I was just talking to my class about is how obviously during, they always think of or the secular world thinks of medieval era as, the Dark Ages. And in a lot of ways, there were many illiterate people, most lay people. As I said, both lay men and lay women were equally uneducated.
Yeah.
But of course, the clergy and, male clergy and female nuns were particularly well educated. And so the women you just rattled off, especially like the Hildegard of Bingen, or many of the incredible doctors of the church, female doctors of the church, are nuns for good reason, right?
Yeah.
Because they actually did have the kind of education that men were afforded, which was a real classical liberal education.
Well, and I think that's the reason that we wanted to make this a Catholic women and gender studies program, because really up until this moment, women and gender studies programs have not come from the Catholic worldview. We've not really dove into that rich history and heritage that we have well-educated women throughout the history of the church. So why would you say that someone should choose this women and gender studies program over other women and gender studies programs that exist in the world?
Well, I'm happy to tackle that one.
What's the difference?
Well, I think it's very obvious that there are, Catholic studies programs, there are Catholic theology programs and Catholic philosophy programs and Catholic liberal arts programs within small colleges. There's a lot of, great books programs within Catholic colleges, all that. And then there are, at very different places, women's studies programs, which are not actually any longer called women's studies programs. They're actually usually called gender studies programs. And often now they're not even run by women. So the entire way in which kind of Marxist feminism has eaten away at its own self has basically kind of undercut the possibility of a secular women's studies program because of their, as Eileen was mentioning, their philosophical issues that don't allow them to even know how to define women or what a flourishing woman is. And so it just opens the door to merge these two things together, to basically take that rich intellectual tradition, Catholic tradition, Western tradition, and then look at questions of women and questions about moral equality, about legal and political equality, about freedom, about authority. These are all the things I teach in my class. I think teaches other things. And in some sense, the way I talk about it with my students is feminism is like a second or even third order question after questions of metaphysics and anthropology, after questions of ethics, even after questions of politics. Feminism kind of exists after you've asked and answered all those questions in a particular philosophical framework. We're asking and answer those questions in a Catholic framework. And then we're comparing them to how other people have, other thinkers throughout the Western tradition have asked and answered those same kind of questions with regard to women and women's flourishing and kind of the particular interests that women have.
Your course really is the prerequisite course that we've just found is critical. Want to share a little bit more about why we start with the human person, body, and soul?
Yeah, no, I was just thinking as Erika was talking. I think one thing I've noticed in our class with our students is that they're so eager to talk about these questions that are going on in the culture, these questions of gender and sexuality. But what I've found is we have to go back to the basics, and that, we'll start, someone will want to jump in and have a conversation about something going on in the news right now, but we don't actually have the tools to talk about it. And what I've realized is that, this is what's going on so much today in the church, especially, is that so many people with so many good intentions who want the best for people are trying to help solve a lot of these cultural issues, but we don't have the tools. So I think just this kind of going back to the foundation, going back to the understanding of the human person, which the Catholic Church has taught for thousands of years now and has been improving in the way they teach it for, these last thousands of years too. I think going back to that is really where we start to be able to kind of untie the knot of what's going on in the culture right now.
So building off of that, you mentioned that having this framework is necessary for us to come to conclusions that maybe are different than the secular culture's conclusions on some of these problems. So this program is not denying that there have been injustices or problems, that maybe women have faced. But coming from a Catholic anthropological background, how do you think our solutions really differ than what have been put forward by, secular feminism's solutions for equality and the problems?
I would jump in on this just because in my course we talk a lot about, we use the word teleology, but like understanding what we're made for and where our final ends are. And then we talk about happiness and human flourishing. And everyone in the world agrees that we want to be happy, right? But what really I think is going to be different in the way we look at it in this program is that we can understand that we've been created and that there is an order to the way God's created the world. So if you start from that, then you can see the end that you're going towards, and how a life of virtue is what will bring you to this happiness. And when you start with that framework, you end up answering questions differently about the human person and about gender and sexuality.
Yeah. Do you want to add on that at all?
Yeah, that's great. That's really well put. And I guess I would add the way I sort of think about this with regard to why we need to even approach these questions at all. Like why, people ask me all the time, like why something like feminism? Like why is feminism necessary? Why not just Christian anthropology? Why not just Catholic anthropology?
Yeah, great question.
That would seem to be great.
Great question.
And the answer is sort of, I always think of sort of there's two reasons. One is something that Catholics understand very well and that feminists have observed, and that is just the reality of sexual asymmetry. So it's the reality that men and women are distinct. Now, whether or not there's moral equality is another question, right? It's a question about, which obviously feminists put forward as just sort of a given or they assert, but the Catholic Church understands as grounded in the Imago Dei, that we're made in the image and likeness of God. So there's a deep moral equality that's there that I don't think, having been a secular feminist myself, that there's any way that modern feminism or different brands of feminism really can answer that question of like, what is the equality that they're asserting between men and women really grounded in? But this asymmetry, this difference, what does that mean? And what's the significance of it? One of the basic significances is obviously that when men and women engage in sexual intercourse, in the, marital act, that men, can pregnate and women can get pregnant and not the opposite, right? So women are made much more vulnerable, and men's superior strength, can be a great force of provision and protection for women, except that there's the fall. And so a really critical part of understanding the importance and the need for something like feminism is the just reality of the fall, the reality of human brokenness, and the reality that things aren't always as God hopes or that we would hope for the relation between men and women. And because of this asymmetry, because of men's superior strength, and because of women's vulnerability, it puts women in great positions of harm when that superior strength is used for domination rather than to serve and to love. And so, that's why, you have laws that are enacted in order to protect vulnerable women, which are some of the great gains of, different waves of feminism throughout the ages. So part of it is looking at what did those, different thinkers, different legal and political, movements, different enactments, like what were they grounded on? What were the philosophical arguments? And, do they make sense to us as Catholics? Can we, say that they are true? Can we say aspects of them are true? And these are the kinds of questions that we ask in our class.
And we do have one of the graduate certificates in this program is the policy, the public and family policy, which I think is incredibly important, what you're talking about, that these solutions that we codify, and make universal through laws, that they have a reflection of this imago Dei, that we, programs like what we're doing are incredibly important to make sure that it's an informed policy and informed solution. If this conversation, if this program is at all interesting to you, we invite you to check out the website at CatholicGenderStudies.com. We are based at the University of St. Thomas at the Nesti Center for Faith and Culture. These are two of our fabulous professors, but there are many more. And we really get to dive in and talk about these things and hopefully lead the culture into this next wave of the new feminism. So thank you so much. Please visit the website, and we hope to connect with you very soon.